Usually when we think about preserving something that's incredibly valuable, something that's just truly irreplaceable, we immediately think about architecture.
Right, like a museum or something.
Exactly. A heavily guarded vault. Like imagine you have this masterpiece painting, right? A centuries-old canvas. What do?
You put it behind thick, bulletproof glass.
Yeah. You meticulously control the humidity in the room. You seal off the ultraviolet lights so the colors don't fade. And at night, you lock these heavy steel doors. You basically create an environment that is entirely devoid of change.
Because you want to freeze it in time. I mean, you isolate the object to protect it from the elements.
Right.
And the logic there is just incredibly binary. It's either safe in the vault, completely unchanging, or it's out in the messy world getting, ruined by dirty hands and sunlight and air.
Because in that specific context, exposure means decay.
Mm-hmm.
But then, and this is what we're really getting into today, I want you to imagine taking that exact same mindset, that architectural vault-like mentality, and applying it to a forest.
Oh, yeah. Or a coral reef.
Right. Think about it. If you take a living, breathing fish out of this chaotic, moving ocean,
Yeah.
and you put it in a sterile, temperature-controlled, hermetically sealed vault with no other organisms around it, well, that doesn't preserve the fish.
No, it kills it.
It kills it instantly.
It's the absolute definition of a category error. You're applying these rigid, static rules of architectural preservation to something that is fundamentally biological.
Yeah.
Something that actually requires interaction and mutation and, well, friction just to survive. I mean, a forest doesn't survive by staying exactly the same. It survives through this constant cycle of decay, regrowth, storms, adaptation.
And the profound category error,
Yeah.
Confusing a living ecosystem for a museum piece,
Yeah.
that is exactly what we are diving into today. Welcome to today's deep dive.
It's a great topic.
It really is. So for the listener joining us right now, whether you're on your commute making dinner or you're just, insanely curious about how the world works, we are going to explore the brilliant work of Gabriel Stroup. Specifically, we're looking at his sweeping three-part fictional epic, the Peleg Manuscripts. We're covering the complete text today, books 1, 2, and 3, Descent of Peleg, Ascent of Peleg, and Beyond Peleg.
That's right.
And the mission of this deep dive is to really explore the incredibly deep, real-world philosophical questions Stroup raises about human language. Is language this rigid monument that needs to be protected behind museum glass? Or is it a wild, living ecology that actually thrives on change?
And what's so fascinating here is that Stroup uses this central metaphor of a massive, just impossibly tall tower to represent our human obsession with control.
A literal ivory tower, almost.
Exactly. And throughout this deep dive, we'll explore how trying to freeze language in place actually destroys it. It's just a brilliant narrative. But what I really love is how heavily it plays with some of our oldest human mythology.
Oh, totally. The inspirations are so clear.
Right. Like if we think about the Tower of Babel, that ancient story frames the fracturing of human language as a curse.
Yeah, a punishment.
Right. It's a punishment from the divine for human hubris, resulting in total chaos and confusion. But Stroup takes that concept and he completely inverts it.
Wait, let's pause there for a second. How exactly does he invert it? Because I always thought the Babel story was basically saying, hey, we used to have it great when we all spoke the exact same language, and now it's just a giant mess.
Yeah, that's definitely the traditional reading. But Stroup's text argues that a single, unified, unchanging language isn't paradise at all. It's a prison.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In his world, the fracturing of language isn't a divine punishment. It's the ultimate gift. I mean, it's the birth of diversity, adaptation, and actual authentic human expression.
That is such a cool flip.
It really is. And he also structures the entire narrative as this physical descent followed by an ascent, which heavily echoes Dante's Divine Comedy.
Yes. The layers of hell.
Exactly. But again, he flips the script.
Yeah.
So in Dante, the deeper you go, the closer you get to hell, right? To rigid, frozen punishment.
Right. The center is literally a block of ice.
Exactly. But in Stroup's tower, descending into the dark, messy depths is where the protagonist actually finds life, warmth, and truth. The frozen punishment is actually at the top.
Okay, let's unpack this. So we are following this scholar named Peleg. And when the story starts, he is at the very top of this massive structure, the summit of the tower.
The highest point.
Right. And up there, he's surrounded by these elite scholars who essentially just hoard classical languages like Latin and ancient Greek. They honestly believe they are preserving the purest forms of human thought.
And everyone else is just beneath them.
Literally beneath them. But Peleg, he gets restless. He realizes something is really wrong, and he embarks on this massive journey. First, he descends into the tower's depths to find out how language actually lives among the commoners.
Down in the dirt.
Yeah. Then, he ascends back up to the summit, only to face a terrifying trial for what he's discovered. And finally, he escapes the crumbling tower entirely, stepping out into this vast, boundless world of global languages.
And, this journey is not just a fantasy quest. It is a meticulously crafted allegory for the very real history of human communication. And it's actually mirroring a debate that is happening right now among linguists.
Right now, today.
Yes. Peleg is grappling with the tension between prescriptive grammar and descriptive grammar.
Okay, let's define those for a second, because that sounds like the kind of thing that makes people just instantly glaze over in English class.
Fair enough, fair enough. So think of prescriptive grammar as the traffic cop of language.
Okay.
It's the rigid rules of how authorities say language should be spoken. Don't end a sentence with a preposition. Don't use double negatives. It prescribes behavior.
Like giving out tickets for bad grammar.
Exactly. Descriptive grammar, on the other hand, is much more like a field biologist. It doesn't judge. It just observes the messy, fluid reality of how language is actually used by people in their daily lives.
So they're just taking notes on what's happening.
Right. A descriptive linguist hears someone say, "I ain't got no money," and instead of saying, "That's wrong," they say, "Fascinating." That community uses double negation for emphasis, much like ancient Greek or modern Spanish.
I love that. And for the listener, think about the slang you use with your friends, right? Or the internet acronyms you just type without thinking.
Absolutely.
Or think about those strict grammar rules you absolutely hated memorizing in middle school. Have you ever been corrected by someone for saying who instead of whom? And didn't it feel a little bit like they were just, I don't know, trying to sound smarter than you?
It usually is a power play.
Yeah. And this story is about exactly why we fight over those things. It's about identity, authority, and survival. So let's jump right into the beginning of his descent. It starts with this prologue called The Whisperer's Grove.
Setting up the myth.
Right. It sets up the mythological origin of language in this world. There's this first tree of thought and tongue where everything was one until a great wind came and scattered the voices.
Yes, and the text actually uses reconstructed Proto-Indo-European here.
Which is such a flex by the author.
It really is. This is the theoretical ancestor of an incredibly wide array of languages. I mean, everything from English and Spanish to Hindi and Russian.
Wow.
Yeah. And the text uses phrases like "Cadel Bideti" mean what you see. The branches of this tree bend away from each other. Hellenica, Latina, Celtica, Germania, Slavia, Indo-Arya.
So it's laying the groundwork.
Exactly. Stroop is establishing from page 1 that language might have begun as a unity, but its natural state, driven by the wind of time, geography, and human migration, is to fracture and evolve.
But the scholars at the summit, they absolutely refuse to see it that way.
They hate that idea.
They really do. We formally meet Peleg in this chamber called the Argent Spire in the Hall of Orders. He's sitting with these Latin and Greek scholars beneath giant marble frescoes of Homer and Virgil.
Very intimidating.
Very. And he brings up this radical idea. He basically asks, what if the way common people speak down in the streets isn't a decay of our perfect language, but an evolution?
And how do they react?
They literally laugh in his face. One rhetorician tells him, the vernacular is a corruption of the ideal. It is our duty to preserve purity, not to concern ourselves with the mutterings of the unlearned.
Wow. I mean, it's the ultimate elitist echo chamber.
Totally.
They view language as something to be quarried and carved in stone. They sincerely believe that once a language reaches a certain literary peak, like the Latin of Cicero or the Greek of Plato, any change to it is objectively bad.
It's automatically a downgrade.
Right, it's a degradation. But Peleg starts to realize that sitting in these beautiful marble halls is actually like being trapped in a cage.
Yeah.
He realizes he is guarding a graveyard. So he decides to walk down the spiral stairs to the lower tiers of the tower, and his first true revelation happens in a place called the Marketplace of Whispers.
I have to say, this scene is so vivid. He goes down into this incredibly crowded labyrinth of traders. The air is thick with the smell of ripe fruit, sweat, spiced wine.
It's so sensory.
Yeah. He walks up to a merchant selling pomegranates, and Peleg, being this fancy scholar, tries to buy one using classical Latin. He points and says, "Quanti," which means, for how much?
And the merchants.
The merchant just smiles and replies, "Quante."
quanto. That single vowel shift from E to O might seem incredibly small, but linguistically, it is monumental.
It's huge for Peleg.
Oh, absolutely. Peleg tries to correct him. He repeats quanti, like a strict teacher, but the merchant just repeats quanto. And not as a correction back at Peleg, but simply as a statement of his own reality.
Like, this is how we say it here.
Exactly. And in that tiny microscopic space between those two syllables, Peleg realizes his own arrogance.
Wait, can you explain why that vowel shift actually happens? Like, in the real world, why do languages get, well, I guess people would say lazy with vowels at the ends of words?
It's a really great question, and lazy is exactly the word those summit scholars would use, but linguists call it economy of effort.
Economy of effort.
Think about it. When you are a merchant in a bustling, loud market, you need to communicate quickly and efficiently. You aren't giving a speech in the Senate, you are selling fruit.
You just want to make the sale.
Right. Over generations, speakers naturally soften or drop the unstressed endings of words just to save time and breath.
That makes sense.
Now, in Latin, the endings of words carried all the grammatical information. They told you who was doing what to whom. But as people started dropping those endings to speak faster, they had to start using prepositions and really rigid word order to make sense of things.
Because otherwise it's just gibberish.
Exactly. That's how we got from the highly complex case system of classical Latin to the simpler preposition-heavy structures of modern Italian or Spanish. It's not decay. It's an incredibly sophisticated subconscious redesign of the language for efficiency.
That makes so much sense. The language isn't degrading, it's adapting to the shape of the merchant's mouth and the immediate needs of the market.
Yes, perfectly said.
And when Peleg runs into Aurelius, this is a fellow scholar from the summit who just happens to be slumming it in the market, but he's keeping his robes perfectly clean. Aurelius mocks him.
Of course he does.
He says the true tongue lies in texts, not in the mouths of merchants. But Peleg fires back, and this is a great line. The streets shape the tongue far more than the texts ever will.
It's a brilliant moment. Peleg is finally recognizing that language is a tool used by the masses, not a jewel hoarded by the elite.
But I have to push back here a little bit on behalf of the listener who might be thinking about their own daily life.
Sure.
Isn't there a danger in losing the original meaning, though? Like if everyone just starts changing vowels, making up new slang, and shifting definitions just because it's efficient, aren't we just playing a massive societal game of linguistic telephone?
That's the fear.
Right. Don't we eventually reach a point where a doctor can't understand a patient or a lawyer can't write a binding contract because the words won't stand still?
That is the exact fear that drives the summit scholars, and it's a very valid fear that exists in our modern world, too. I mean, think about how people react when dictionaries add new definitions to words.
Oh, people lose their minds.
They really do.
Yeah.
Like when literally was updated to also mean figuratively, because that's how people were using it for emphasis. People panicked. They felt like the foundation of logic was crumbling.
I remember that outrage.
Right. And you mentioned lawyers and doctors. Yes, in highly specialized fields, we create artificial, rigid subsets of language called jargon, specifically to avoid ambiguity.
Because if I'm getting surgery, I want the doctor's textbook to mean exactly what it says. I don't want economy of effort near my internal organ.
Precisely. But Stroop's text argues that while you can create specialized pockets of rigidity, you cannot apply that to the entire river of human communication.
It just doesn't work.
No. The linguistic telephone isn't a flaw, it's a feature. A language that doesn't change is a dead language. The gap between quanti and quanto is where the human element actually lives. If you try to stop that river with a chain link fence, which is essentially what the summit is doing with their grammar rules, you don't stop the water. You just end up with a rusty fence.
That is such a good way to put it. And
Yeah.
if you follow that river down, you see where the water goes. So Peleg continues down to the city of grand tongues.
The Romance languages.
Exactly. He looks down at this sprawling city that is essentially the children of the Roman Empire. And Stroop does this beautiful job of personifying each language through the merchants.
He really does.
You have the Italian merchant whose tongue rolls with this looseness unknown to the summit. He uses his hands, and his speech is meant to be felt. He tells Peleg, "You scholars chase perfection, but we have given Latin life."
And notice how Stroop ties the evolution of these languages to the physical geography they inhabited.
Yeah.
The Spanish merchant's speech is described as weightier, hardened by sun and conquest, with consonants sharp like the edges of mountains but softened by poetry and waves.
I love that description.
Yeah.
But linguistically, how does geography actually harden a continent? Like, physically?
It's related to what linguists call a substratum.
Substratum.
Right. When the Romans conquered the Iberian Peninsula, they brought Latin. But the people living there already spoke indigenous languages: Iberian, Celtiberian, Basque.
They weren't just blank slates.
Exactly. When those adults were forced to learn Latin, they spoke it with their native accents, applying their own native phonology to the Latin words.
Oh, like when I try to speak French, I sound incredibly American.
Yes. Over centuries, that accent became the new standard. So
Yeah.
the sharpness of the mountains is really a poetic way of describing the linguistic influence of the pre-Roman peoples who lived in those mountains.
That is fascinating.
Then you have the Lusitanian merchant representing Portuguese, who is quieter, slipping between vowels like the tide.
And the French merchant. He admits his Latin is wrapped in the syllables of bards and warriors from the deep forests.
Exactly. That's the Germanic Frankish influence softening and nasalizing the Latin into what we now know as French. What Peleg is witnessing is a literal ecology. A single seed of Latin was planted in different soils: mountains, coastlines, mist-filled forests, and it grew into entirely different plants.
Even the Romanian poet, who is the farthest flung geographically, says to Peleg, "My Latin still lives, even if it has learned to dance with foreign steps." I just love that phrasing.
It's very beautiful.
It really reframes the way we think about dialects. They aren't mistakes. They are local adaptations. But as Peleg goes even deeper, the vibe completely changes. We move from languages that mutated from a massive dominant empire to languages that had to fight a brutal, desperate war simply to exist.
Yes, this brings us deeper into the dark. Peleg enters these mist-clad forests and encounters the shattered tongues of the Celts.
And Stroop introduces a profound melancholy here.
Very much so.
Peleg walks through the ruins of the Gauls. A farmer standing in this barren field tells him, "The Romans took our words and shaped them into their own. What is left is not ours anymore."
It's a reminder that language evolution isn't always a peaceful negotiation in a fruit market.
Sometimes it's a literal conquest.
Yes, Gaulish was swallowed whole by the Roman Empire. But then Peleg finds the living Celts, the Irish and the Manx.
The shattered tongues.
Right. And here the language isn't rigid like Latin. It's swaying, flowing. They are gathered around evening fires, and a bard speaks. What really struck me here is how Peleg notices there is no parchment anywhere.
No books.
No stone inscriptions at all. The language lives entirely in breath, passed from mouth to ear.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a radical shift in how language relates to power and survival. I want you to consider why a culture would actively choose not to write things down.
Right, because an elder tells Peleg, "We do not write ours down, not because we cannot, but because to write is to surrender."
I was so fascinated by that line. Why is writing it down considered surrendering? I would think writing it down is exactly how you save it forever.
That is the Summit Scholar's mindset. But for the Celts, as depicted here, carving their language into stone or writing it on parchment turns the language into an object. And objects can be stolen, objects can be burned by invaders, objects can be locked in a Roman vault.
Oh, wow.
If you put your language in a book, you don't have to speak it anymore. You can get lazy. But if a language lives only in the breath of the people, it forces the community to stay together.
It forces connection.
It forces them to speak it every single day, to sit around that fire and share it just to keep it alive. To the Celts, an unspoken tongue is a dead tongue. The reliance on human memory and oral tradition becomes this invisible, unburnable fortress.
But wait, is the text saying that suffering makes a language stronger? Because that feels like a really heavy burden to place on a culture.
It does.
It's like saying your language is so beautiful and poetic because you've been brutally oppressed for centuries. That feels uncomfortably romanticized to me.
That's a crucial pushback, and it's a trap many romantic linguists fall into, but Stroop actually anticipates it.
How so?
Peleg realizes that the songs of the Celts are beautiful, yes, but songs do not build walls. Songs do not stop the tide of war. The survival of these languages isn't romanticized as some pure, glowing victory. It's framed as a desperate, exhausting necessity.
It's survival mode.
Exactly. It takes immense caloric and emotional energy to keep an oral tradition alive under the boot of an empire.
Yeah.
And this contrast becomes even sharper when Peleg moves from the Celtic fires to the Germanic tribes.
Right, the realm of the warring tongues.
Yeah.
Peleg descends into this area that is scarred by war and shifting allegiances. He meets speakers of Old Norse, Old High German, Gothic, Dutch.
The atmosphere totally shifts here.
Immediately, it's so tense it's not a warm campfire anymore. He sees a Norse speaker and a High German speaker eyeing each other, hands resting on the hilts of their sword.
Ready to fight.
Yeah. They can mostly understand each other, but their sentences are shaped by a distinct memory of conflict.
The Germanic languages here are described as a banner and a shield, while the Celts used language as an invisible thread to bind their community together internally. The Germanic tribes use language as a boundary to keep others out.
It's offensive.
Very. An elder woman speaking Gothic looks at Peleg with intense suspicion. They borrow words freely from Latin, but they never surrender to its grammar. Their language is a tool of defiance. It's a way of defining exactly who is us and who is them.
It's like language is a literal password.
Exactly. In linguistics, we call that a shibboleth.
A shibboleth.
Yes, a word or pronunciation that distinguishes one group of people from another. The Germanic tribes weaponize their phonology. If you say the word wrong, you're an outsider and maybe an enemy.
And then Peleg travels further east in the depths of the tower to the oppressed tongues of the Slavic people.
Oh,
And I have to say, the atmosphere here genuinely gave me chills.
it's a very powerful section.
It's not the roaring winds of the Norse or the marching precision of Latin. It's this heavy, pregnant silence. He walks into a village and a Ukrainian elder tells him, "He is not like them. You wish to hear our words? Then listen to the weight they carry."
The history of the Slavic tongues, as portrayed in this section of the tower, is one of constant endurance against erasure.
Just constant pressure.
Yes. They were pressured by the Norse from the north, by the Greeks from the south, by the Latin scholars from the west. Other empires constantly tried to tell them that their words were crude, that they were just peasants, that God only heard prayers if they were spoken in Greek or Latin.
And Peleg has this conversation with a young Bulgarian boy that completely wrecks his worldview. He asks the boy something along the lines of, what makes a language worthy?
And Peleg expects a very academic answer, right?
Right. He expects an answer about poetry or philosophy or grammatical precision. But what does the boy actually say?
The boy simply answers that we still speak it.
That we still speak it. That is so powerful. It completely destroys the summit's entire philosophy.
It does.
The summit believes a language is worthy because of its pedigree. But down here in the dark, survival is the only metric that matters. The Slavic villagers didn't mistake silence for surrender. They used their language as an invisible fortress in their homes when the doors were closed.
It's quiet defiance.
It really makes you think about cultural resilience today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how many cultures around the world hold on to a specific dialect or an accent or a localized slang term, not because it's the most efficient way to communicate with the global market, but as a stubborn way of saying, we are still here. You didn't erase us.
Precisely. And this triggers a moment of profound, uncomfortable self-reflection for Peleg. He thinks about his own native tongue, Greek.
The language of the philosophers.
Right. Up in the academies, Greek was crowned as the ultimate vessel of human reason, the language of math and logic and philosophy. But standing among the Albanians, the Armenians, and the Lithuanians on this ever-winding stair, Peleg realizes a hard truth.
Which is?
Greek didn't survive because it was inherently biologically superior to Gaulish or Gothic.
Right. He realizes Greek survived by what he calls lame fortune.
Just luck.
It had the luxury of never having to remember what others tried to take. It was the language of the conquerors, of the elite. It was never endangered. It was never smuggled through famine or genocide. The scholars at the top of the tower completely confused their historical privilege with linguistic superiority.
It is a devastating critique of how we often study history and linguistics.
It really is.
We look at the languages that dominate the globe today, English, Mandarin, Spanish, and we implicitly assume they won the evolutionary race because they were simply better, sharper tools for human thought.
Because they're the best languages.
Right. But Stroop is arguing that more often than not, they just had bigger armies, more ruthless navies, better geography, or frankly, just better luck. I mean, English didn't become the global lingua franca because its grammar is perfect.
English grammar is a nightmare.
Its grammar is actually a horrific, chaotic mess. It became global because of the British Navy and American economic dominance, period. And this humbling realization prepares Peleg for the absolute bottom of the tower.
So Peleg keeps going down. The air gets really dry and sour. The lanterns are incredibly dim. And he enters this massive chamber called the Fossils of the Forgotten Tongues.
The graveyard.
Yeah. He is surrounded by these towering, dusty stone shelves filled with clay tablets and what the text calls orthofossils.
Right. Orthofossils being a brilliant portmanteau of orthography, the conventional spelling system of a language, and fossils.
So cool. He sees inscriptions in Hittite, Mycenaean, Tocharian,
Yeah.
Etruscan, and something called Linear B. He describes the entire room as linguistic taxidermy.
Such a great image.
They are preserved shapes, but they have absolutely no breath in them.
This is the nightmare scenario for the summit scholars, brought to terrifying life. The languages down here were the languages of powerful kings and massive emperors. They built ancient, sprawling civilizations, and now
Now what are they?
they are just puzzles in a forgotten morgue.
So wait, the text mentions Linear B down in this graveyard. What exactly is that? Because it sounds like a weird sci-fi movie.
Linear B is a real-world script. It was used by the Mycenaean Greeks around 1400 BC.
Go.
For a long time, modern archaeologists had no idea how to read it. When they finally deciphered it in the 1950s, they were hoping for epic poetry, lost myths of gods and heroes. Do you know what they found?
Let me guess. Tax records.
Exactly. It was essentially an administrative spreadsheet system.
You're joking.
Nope. Lists of sheep, grain, and chariot wheels. It's a stark reminder that writing doesn't automatically capture the soul of a culture. Sometimes it just captures its bureaucracy.
Wow. So Peleg is walking through these aisles of dead bureaucratic spreadsheets, and an old scribe appears out of the shadows. He's called a keeper of voices.
And he shows Peleg something incredible.
He shows him this heavy stone slab. It's etched with symbols that don't belong to any known alphabet. Peleg looks at it and describes it as raw thought set in stone instinct fossilized before it had ever found a grammar.
It's primal.
And Peleg asks the scribe, how many languages have been lost?
And the scribe replies, how many rivers have dried? How many stars have burned out? It's a terrifying sense of scale.
It really is. It makes you pause and think about how many thousands of human languages have existed throughout history. Languages full of beautiful poetry, inside jokes, heartbreak, entirely unique ways of viewing the universe that vanished without a single scratch on a rock.
Gone. Completely gone.
The scribe tells Peleg, the past is filled with voices that have faded. The real question is, will yours?
Oof.
And this completely shatters Peleg's assumption of permanence. Writing doesn't guarantee immortality. If a language loses its living, breathing speakers, the text just becomes a tombstone.
Yeah.
But the true paradigm shift, the moment that breaks the entire logic of the tower, happens when Peleg reaches the absolute lowest point, a place called the floor of silence.
He steps into this bare chamber. There are no letters carved into the walls, no glyphs, no clay tablets, just a single man sitting on a weathered stone.
A single man. The man speaks to Peleg. And Peleg, who is a master linguist, who knows Greek, Latin, Celtic, Germanic, Slavic, doesn't recognize a single syllable.
Not one.
There is no Indo-European kinship, no trace of shared ancestry. It's Basque, or as they call it, Euskara.
This is the anomaly.
Right.
Up until this point, Peleg, much like many 19th and early 20th century European linguists, viewed language as a massive, neat family tree. Everything traces back to a root. You can follow the branches from English back to Germanic, back to Proto-Indo-European, but Basque is what we call a language isolate.
Break that down for the listener. What does it actually mean to be an isolate?
It means it has absolutely no known genealogical relationship to any other living language in the world. It is a linguistic orphan.
None at all.
None. It predates the entire Indo-European migration into Europe. When the tribes that would eventually become the Celts, Romans, and Germans swept across the continent, bringing their shared root language with them, they wiped out whatever languages were there before.
Except for Basque.
Except for Basque. Basque survived in the Pyrenees Mountains. It just sat there, completely unique, while the rest of the continent changed around it.
Peleg is stunned. He says, that's not possible. Every language comes from somewhere. And the Basque speaker looks at him and says, does it? Not all stories are carved in stone. Some survive not because they were carried forward by an empire, but because they refuse to fade.
It's so defiant.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The Basque man asks Peleg a question. He says, do you still believe this tower was built to reach the ground?
Oh, this is the turning point.
Peleg looks around, really looks at the bedrock, and realizes
It doesn't.
the tower is a hollow scaffold. The foundation that the summit scholars deeply believe in, this neat, orderly progression of language from a single divine or logical root, is a total fiction.
It's a lie.
The tower is built on top of a messy, wild, uncontainable phenomena that defies academic categorization. There are massive cracks in the bedrock. The Indo-European tree doesn't explain everything. So Peleg has hit rock bottom. He's realized the map he's been using his entire life is missing half the continents. He actually finds a hidden door leading out to the real world, but he stops.
He can't just leave.
No. He decides he has a moral obligation to go back up the stairs and tell his colleagues the truth. He has to share what he's found. And this kicks off his harrowing journey back up.
When Peleg begins his ascent, his eyes are wide open. He is no longer looking at the tower through the lens of a loyal, indoctrinated scholar.
Seeing it for what it is.
He's looking at it as an awakened witness. And what he sees on the way up is a chilling exploration of institutional pathology. It's a study of how the noble desire to protect an idea inevitably mutates into a desperate desire to control people.
So what does this all mean for Peleg? Think about it. The deeper he went, he saw that language was a tool for survival, a living breath, a community bond. But on the way back up, looking at the middle and upper levels, he realizes that language has been transformed into a tool for oppression.
Let's break down the distinct levels he visits on the ascent, because each one represents a different way institutions weaponize language.
Let's do it.
First, he encounters the cult of the rootless. These are scholars who have become so obsessed with finding the primordial, pure, mathematical root of language that they have entirely divorced themselves from actual meaning.
They wear those clay masks, right?
Yes, they wear blank, featureless clay masks to erase their human identities. They pace in circles, chanting reconstructed poems that have absolutely no translation. They worship hypotheticals.
They literally refuse to translate their own chants because it would defile the sound. They've completely lost the plot. Language is supposed to be for communication between human beings, and they've turned it into this empty mathematical noise.
Exactly.
It honestly reminds me of modern academia sometimes, when a field gets so bogged down in dense, impenetrable jargon that it completely loses touch with the real world. You read a paper and think, are you trying to explain something, or are you just trying to prove you belong to the club?
Exactly. Stroop writes, they have not found the root. They have become lost within it. It's the fetishization of structure over substance.
And then he keeps climbing.
Next, Peleg ascends to the Academy of Iron Tongues. This was once the Germanic level he visited on the way down, but institutionalized. Now, it's a sterile, terrifying vault of steel doors and iron filing cabinets.
They're cold.
The scholars carry stylus pens shaped like literal daggers. Their grammatical debates are physical combat, and precision is their absolute creed. To speak a word one generation removed from the standard sanctioned form is considered treason.
And when Peleg asks what happens to the linguists who are defeated in these grammatical debates, a scholar whispers to him, they are sorted, their speech is disassembled until only roots remain.
It's so grim.
That is genuinely terrifying. It's the weaponization of grammar. It makes you think of authoritarian regimes, how dictatorships dictate exactly what words can and cannot be used in the press, punishing any deviation.
We see this even more clearly in the next level, the Ice of Allegiance.
Oh, this part is wild.
Peleg walks into a frozen courtyard and sees a surveillance totem shaped like a giant nesting doll, with its innermost face polished into a blank mirror. Emotion has been systematically leached from the words here.
And he tries to just say hello to someone.
Right. When Peleg, trying to be polite, speaks a friendly, warm, older dialect to a passing citizen, a machine embedded in the wall instantly prints out a corrected paper slip.
Like a receipt for bad speech.
It revises his warm greeting into the state's chosen, sterile dialect to prevent unrest. The soul of the sentence is exiled.
It's pure Orwellian nightmare. It's 1984, but specifically focused on syntax. But then he hits the Celtic level. And this one broke my heart.
Me too.
Remember how beautiful the Celtic fireside songs were on the descent? The breath, the community. Now it's ruled by the Bard Kings. The harps have severed strings. The Bard Kings sit in this broken marble amphitheater, wearing crowns made of feathers plucked from silent songbirds.
Such a tragic image.
The performers recite state-approved verses. But just before the final stanza, the stanza that usually contained the emotional climax or the moral of the story, the song is abruptly cut off.
Censored.
And the audience, completely dead-eyed, applauds out of strict obedience.
A rogue bard hiding in the shadows tells Peleg, rebellion is the silence we leave in every final stanza.
Wow.
It's a profound metaphor for censorship. The institutions of the Tower have recognized the immense emotional power of the Celtic songs. They know music can move people to riot, but because they cannot control the emotion, they amputate the song. They prefer an incomplete, sterile, state-sanctioned ritual over a dangerous, living truth.
And finally, Right before he reaches the summit, he passes through the romance level again. But the living, breathing marketplace with the pomegranate merchant has turned into the marketplace of masks.
Pure commodification.
Yes. It's grotesque. Hawkers are standing on boxes shouting, "Authenticity half price!" and regional charm accent included. People are walking around buying papier-mâché masks of different dialects, putting on linguistic identities like cheap coats.
This is perhaps Stroop's sharpest, most biting critique of modernity and late-stage capitalism. It's the corporate co-opting of authentic culture.
Oh, without a doubt.
I want the listener to think about how quickly countercultural slang or specific regional dialects are vacuumed up by massive marketing departments and turned into slogans to sell products. The slogans, Stroop writes in the text, freedom through fluency, speak to belong, are deeply cynical contradictions. The market has confused noise for vitality.
Oh, it is so relatable to the listener today. It's exactly like seeing a massive, multi-billion-dollar fast food corporation tweeting out AAV, African-American vernacular English or Gen Z TikTok slang to sell chicken nuggets. They strip the language of its cultural context, its history, its community, and just wear it as a mask to drive engagement. It's totally hollow. So Peleg pushes through this nightmare and finally reaches the marble gate at the summit.
Peleg returns to the elite scholars. He stands before Magistrate Corvinus and his former friend Lyra. They're standing perfectly still, like the statues of Homer and Virgil above them.
Very dramatic.
Corvinus looks down at Peleg, tells him he has descended into madness and blasphemy, and formally charges him with perverting sacred texts and introducing corruption.
But Peleg, changed by everything he has seen, refuses to back down. He looks Corvinus in the eye and tells him, truth does not cower behind marble. It walks the path of the broken, the silenced, the forgotten.
Which leads right to the trial.
Peleg is put on trial in this massive, scorched amphitheater. The tribunal members wear heavy masks of steel and gold, and Lyra, his old colleague, actually screams at him.
She's furious.
She yells that he's intentionally undermining the tower's foundations, that the classical languages they study are sacred, divine gifts that shouldn't be corrupted by his reckless abandon. But Peleg looks at the broken quill on the desk in front of him and realizes a cold truth. This isn't a trial about linguistic truth at all.
No, not at all.
It's a pageant of power.
This raises an important question. Why do massive institutions cling to dogmas even when the empirical evidence against them is absolutely overwhelming?
Because it's about control.
Right. Peleg realizes that Corvinus and Lyra no longer seek knowledge, they seek authority. If they admit that language belongs to the pomegranate merchant, to the Celtic bard, to the Slavic child, then the scholars are no longer the gatekeepers of truth.
They lose their jobs.
Exactly. And power, when it is built on a rigid, false, exclusionary foundation, is incredibly fragile. Peleg tells the tribunal, the tower has fallen not because of the truths I speak, but because it has lost the will to listen.
And then, the climax. The tower literally begins to collapse.
It's a huge set piece.
The bedrock cracks under the weight of its own decay. Statues of ancient grammarians shatter into pieces, and Stroop writes this incredibly vivid image. The sacred tomes, the heavy books the scholars hoarded for centuries, fall from the collapsing shelves like heavy feathers and catch fire midair.
But the scholars don't run.
That's the craziest part. They stand proud, coughing in the smoke, clutching their burning books to their chest, trying to physically uphold the crumbling marble pillars. It's pathetic.
It really is.
It's like a massive corporation going completely bankrupt. The roof of the headquarters is literally caving in, and the CEO is still sitting in the boardroom demanding that the employee dress code be strictly followed.
It's the ultimate tragic irony of prescriptive obsession. In their desperate, violent attempt to protect language from the corruption of the common people, they destroyed it. They entombed it. As Peleg is cast down in the collapse, tumbling through the dust and fire, he realizes that the knowledge the tower hoarded was never actually meant for enlightenment. It was kept specifically to divide people, to elevate a privileged few above the many. The fall of the tower is his ultimate liberation.
Escaping the burning ruins, Peleg wipes the ash from his face and drops his old academic title. He takes a new name, Kairos.
A new beginning.
And he steps out of the hidden door at the bottom of the rubble into the blinding light of the sun. And this brings us to the final part of our journey, Book 3, The World Without Walls.
For his entire life, Peleg thought the Indo-European Tower was the entire world. He thought it contained every mechanism of thought possible.
It was all he knew.
But when he steps outside, the atmosphere completely changes. He sees a vast, boundless landscape. And in the far distance, he sees other structures, other organic settlements, the Afro-Asiatic, Uralic, Sino-Tibetan, and Austronesian language families.
He realizes the Indo-European family is just one single frayed thread in the massive tapestry of human speech.
And the rules out here in this boundless world are completely different. He visits the Afro-Asiatic lands, which is the real-world language family that includes Arabic, Hebrew, Amharic, and Somali.
Right.
He wanders into this sun-scorched, breathtaking canyon and hears a low, rhythmic chant echoing off the walls. He meets an Arabic elder who tells him something that sounds familiar but has a new twist. To write is to trap, and a trapped word dies.
Oh, kind of like the Celts, but different?
They recompose the chant every single time they speak it. The root of the word stays exactly the same, but they shift the vowels depending on the emotion of the moment.
Let's spend a moment on the mechanics here, because Afro-Asiatic languages, particularly Semitic ones like Arabic and Hebrew, function beautifully and completely differently from English.
Yes, they do.
They are built on what we call triliteral roots.
Explain that for me. How does a root work if the vowels keep changing?
Imagine a skeleton of 3 consonants. Let's take the Arabic root KTB, which generally relates to the concept of writing. Those 3 consonants are the fixed anchor, but the vowels are the flesh that moves and breathes.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you put certain vowels in, you get kitab, which means book. Change the vowels, you get kitib, meaning writer. Change them again, you get maktab, meaning desk or office.
So the root is always there.
So the elder in the canyon is explaining that the consonants hold the ancestral truth, but the speaker provides the vowels, the breath in the present moment to give it specific life.
That is beautiful. A Coptic woman tracing hieroglyphs in the dust nearby tells him, not every resurrection needs a body. Some need only a voice.
Oh, wow.
And there's a Hausa musician who tells Kairos that he doesn't rely on his own memory to keep his song alive. He relies on trust. He sings his part, and he inherently trusts the next voice in the canyon to catch the melody and carry it forward.
And then Stroop shows us the real-world application of this vocal trust. Kairos sees a Somali woman performing Gabe poetry.
Yes. She tells him that these spoken poems have literally stopped physical wars and cooled multi-generational blood feuds.
Just with poetry.
Yes, and these massive epic verses are passed down entirely through memory in a duet of survival between speakers. It's incredible. But then he travels far to the north to the Uralic languages, a place called the Singing Grove.
The Uralic language family includes languages like Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian, and Sami. And what Kairos discovers here is that their language is deeply, inextricably tied to their ecology.
The environment matters.
In Singing Grove, the word for north isn't fixed on a magnetic compass. It changes depending on where you physically stand in the forest and who you are talking to.
Wait, really?
Words grow roots and branches. A tree isn't just a generic noun tree. It's expressed as the tree near the rushing water that remembers the winter wind.
Wait, how can direction change depending on who you are talking to? How do they not get completely lost?
It's a different spatial cognition. Some languages in the world use absolute direction, north, south, east, west, no matter which way they are facing.
Right.
If there's a bug on your leg, they'd say, there's an ant on your southwest knee. But in the Uralic example Stroop uses, direction is relational. It forces the speaker to constantly be aware of their environment and their conversational partner.
That's amazing.
And they do write things down, but in a very specific way. Kairos watches them carve runes into melting snowbanks.
Melting snowbanks. Why would you write on something that melts?
Because, as an Estonian elder tells him, if it stays, it hardens. They deliberately write their laws and stories into the snow, knowing they will melt by dawn. It is the absolute polar opposite of the Summit scholars carving Latin into eternal marble.
It represents a total embrace of impermanence. The past isn't preserved in dead stone. It is sung into the warm breath of the present.
Exactly.
But Kairos' understanding of how meaning is constructed is challenged even further when he moves east and encounters the Sino-Tibetan languages.
Oh man, the chapter called The Fire That Speaks Twice. Kairos walks into this dense green bamboo forest and hears what sounds like musical chimes.
It's a completely different soundscape.
He watches a teacher instructing young children, and he learns about tone. In Mandarin, for example, the syllable ma can mean completely different things depending on the pitch of your voice.
Yes.
The teacher demonstrates. She says, ma, ma, ma. And Kairos, who thought he was the greatest linguist in the world, tries to mimic it, and he completely fails.
Let's explain the mechanism of tonal languages because it often baffles Indo-European speakers.
Please do.
In English, we use pitch to convey emotion or to ask a question. You're going to the store. Pitch goes up at the end, but the word store still means store.
Right.
In tonal languages, like Mandarin or Vietnamese, the pitch, the fundamental frequency produced by the tension of your vocal cords, is hardwired into the semantic meaning of the word itself.
The teacher tells Kairos, your ma is too soft. The tone is the shape of the meaning. Without it, the word is nothing.
Exactly. In the Indo-European languages, Kairos knows, you change meaning by adding a prefix, a suffix, or changing the word order. Here, the meaning is sculpted entirely by the physical manipulation of pitch in the throat.
Like a physical craft.
Language is described as a fire that must be tended carefully. If you change the pitch, you don't just mispronounce a vowel, you summon a completely different concept into existence.
I can relate to Kairos so much here. I tried to learn a little Mandarin once, and it is terrifying. If I mess up the pitch, I could be trying to politely say mother and accidentally end up calling someone a horse or scolding them.
That happens a lot.
And when Kairos tries to give a formal greeting at a communal feast in the forest, he absolutely butchers it. He's mortified. He expects to be banished or laughed at like he would have been at the summit.
But they don't laugh.
No. The people don't judge him. They gently gather around him, and they repeat the word, softly lifting his tones with their own voices until his pitch aligns with theirs. He realizes language isn't a mountain to be conquered. It requires intense humility.
It's a beautiful moment of linguistic grace. And this pushes Kairos further out into the world. He encounters the Austroasiatic root speakers in these deep, echoing caverns.
This part is so wild.
Here, he learns that language isn't just spoken by the voice, it is physical movement. The people communicate complex ideas through the rhythm of their feet stamping on the stone, the swaying of their shoulders, the vibrations they send through the earth. It's a language woven entirely through physical presence and touch.
Kairos actually takes out his old leather notebook from the tower. He looks at it and he literally buries it in the dirt.
He just gives up on it.
He realizes that trying to capture this living, breathing, full-body dance with black ink on flat paper is completely inadequate. He lets the notebook return to the earth, and then he travels to the edge of the land, to the sea, where he sails with an Austronesian family.
The Austronesian expansion is historically one of the greatest maritime migrations in human history.
Unbelievable what they did.
They spread across the vastness of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Kairos sails with them, and he realizes they have absolutely no paper maps, no compasses. They navigate entirely by an archipelago of names.
But when Kairos asks the mother what the names carved on a piece of driftwood mean, she tells him, each island will tell you a different answer. Names are not fixed. They live in the spaces between us.
The mental mapping required for Austronesian navigation is staggering. They read the swell of the waves, the stars, the flight of birds, and they encode all of that data into names and chants. The language itself is the map, but because the ocean is always changing, the map must always change.
And when a violent, terrifying storm hits their small boat, the grandmother doesn't panic. She sits calmly at the bow of the boat, gripping the wood, and begins to chant in ancient Chamorro.
Right into the storm.
She names the islands, and by naming the memories, the ocean currents, and the stories of her ancestors, she mentally grounds the boat and guides it back on course. The names are fluid, shifting with the tides.
It's incredibly moving.
It's so beautiful that Kairos, the man who used to be the ultimate grammar cop at the summit, takes a knife, carves his old academic name Peleg into the wood, and tosses it into the sea. He embraces the fluidity.
But the true emotional climax of his entire life's journey happens when he returns to land and encounters the Native American languages.
Oh, this scene.
He finds a scarred, golden plain that is dotted with the decaying ruins of old brick assimilation schools. But among the ashes of these terrible schools, fresh, warm fires are burning.
He goes into a burned, ruined church, and there's a Dene Navajo elder watching over a group of children who are chanting.
The resilience is amazing.
The elder tells Kairos a story about a grandmother who survived the schools. When they beat her for speaking her language, she embroidered the Navajo words into complex geometric codes on blankets to hide it from the teachers.
She wove the language into the fabric.
And then a little child walks up and hands Kairos a worn, dirt-covered leather bundle. The child says in Cree, This is the prayer we buried so that it could rise again.
They dig up the bundle together in the center of the ruins, and a young boy stands up and speaks a creation myth in Iroquoian that the scholars of the summit had proudly declared extinct centuries ago.
The whole community is just weeping.
The entire community weeps with joy. It is a profound, tear-inducing testament to the fact that language can survive immense trauma, forced assimilation, and brutal cultural erasure, as long as the breath remains within the community. It survives not as an artifact in a class museum case, but as a living piece of the people's hearts.
Which flows seamlessly into his final stop in the world, the Niger-Congo languages. He walks into a bustling, vibrant village where words are never ever spoken in isolation.
And never alone.
The people are sitting in a massive circle, and the language functions as a co-authored song. One person starts a sentence, another person finishes it, adding their own layers of meaning. No single word can stand alone.
This completely redefines the concept of syntax and communication. In Peleg's old world at the summit, communication was viewed as a sterile transmission of data.
Like sending an email.
Right. Person A carefully constructs a perfectly grammatical sentence in their brain and sends it to person B. But in this Niger-Congo village, applying philosophies akin to Ubuntu, I am because we are, communication is a shared space we build together.
That's a huge shift.
You don't own your sentence. You offer a phrase to the circle, and the community finishes it. Your identity flexes with the group.
Cairo steps into the circle. He's hesitant. He's an old man now. He sings a phrase softly, and immediately another voice across the fire picks it up. It isn't a grammatical correction, it's a continuation. He realizes the ultimate question of language isn't what does this mean, but rather who will speak it next.
And that profound realization brings us to the epilogue of Stroop's epic and the close of our deep dive.
The end of the journey.
Kairos is a very old man. He sits beneath an ancient, sprawling tree. He has a piece of parchment in his lap, a remnant of his old life.
But he doesn't write on it. He leaves the scroll completely blank. Instead, he reaches into the dirt, picks up a single living seed, and presses it into the center of the parchment.
It's so poetic.
He speaks the story of his life to a young child sitting next to him, freely giving his words to the air. The child listens, and then immediately retells the story back to him. And she changes it. She adds new details, new slang.
And he's fine with that.
He just laughs. He knows it's right all the same. He realizes he is no longer the keeper of language. He is only its echo.
The core realization of the Peleg Manuscripts is unmistakable. Language is not a tower to be guarded, ranked, or perfected by scholars in marble halls.
Not at all.
It is not architecture. It is an ecology. It is a trail of breath across time, a fire that must be shared, and it only survives if it is allowed to change.
Which brings us right back to where we started. If you put a living thing in a sterile vault, you kill it. You can't preserve language behind bulletproof glass. But as we wrap up this massive journey, I want to leave you with a slightly different thought.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the magic of human breath, friction, geography, and community shaping our words. But look at the world we are building right now. Think about the advent of AI and large language models.
Oh, that's a fascinating parallel.
Right. If language is truly an ecology that requires human breath, a physical environment, and a real community to survive, what happens when the vast majority of the text we consume on a daily basis is generated by a machine?
A machine with no breath?
Exactly. A machine that has no breath, no geography, no culture, and no heartbeat. It's just predicting the next most statistically probable word based on billions of dead texts scraped from the internet.
That's unsettling to think about.
Are we, right now, building the ultimate sterile Tower of Babel in our server farms? Are we locking ourselves back in the vault? It's something to think about the next time you ask a machine to speak for you. Until next time, keep listening, keep adapting, and let your language live.